The rise of Sumerian city-states. How did geographic challenges lead to the rise of city-states in Mesopotamia? Introduction. Early people who lived in the Fertile Crescent began farming and living in small villages. But over time, small Neolithic villages grew into large, complex cities. These villages were located in a land of rolling hills and low plains, called Mesopotamia, in modern-day Iraq. Mesopotamia is a Greek word that means the land between the rivers. The two main rivers of the Fertile Crescent are the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. Cities first appeared in the southern region of this land, with the earliest dating back to 3500 BCE. These were similar to small independent countries. Each had their own ruler as well as their own farmland to provide food. Suppose that you are visiting one of these early cities. You would see a walled settlement surrounded by farmland used to supply food for the city, as well as strong city walls constructed with sun-baked bricks. Moats or ditches that filled the water would surround these walls and help keep out enemies. During an attack, people living outside the city walls would flee inside for protection. As you gazed at the city, you might wonder how it came to be built. Why didn't people in Mesopotamia go on living in small villages, as their ancestors had done for thousands of years? Why did large city-states thrive in the land between the rivers? In this lesson, you'll learn the answers to these questions. Section 1. Mesopotamia, a difficult environment. It was not easy to live in the part of the Fertile Crescent called Mesopotamia. The northern part was hilly and received rain. The southern part had low plains or flat land. The sun beat down fiercely on the plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. There was little rain. The people here were farmers, and their farms needed water. The rivers overflowed onto the plains during flood season, but for most of the year, the soil was hard and dry because of the arid climate. On the plains, building materials were difficult to find. There were plenty of reeds, which were weeds that grow near rivers, but there were few trees to provide wood, and even stones were scarce, and there were few natural barriers to keep out enemies. Mesopotamians faced four major problems as they attempted to survive in this environment: food shortages in the hills, an uncontrolled water supply on the plains, difficulties in building and maintaining systems that provided water across village boundaries, and attacks by neighboring communities. Over time, they found solutions to these four problems. Let's explore how their solutions led to the building of some of the world's first cities. Section 2. Food shortages in the hills. In Neolithic times, people in some areas of the world began farming. One of the areas that had good conditions for growing crops was the rolling foothills of the Zagros Mountains in northern Mesopotamia. Mild weather and plentiful rains made the foothills a good place to farm. The nearby wooded hills provided timber for building shelters and plenty of stones for tool making. Over several thousand years, these conditions allowed the number of people in Mesopotamia to grow dramatically. Then problems arose. Some historians think that by 5000 BCE, farmers in the Zagros foothills did not have enough land to grow food for the increasing population. As a result, villages began to suffer from food shortages. Below the foothills and to the south, the Euphrates and Tigris rivers ran through flat plains. The plains covered a large area of land, and few people lived there. During most of the year, the land was very hard and dry. The plains lacked trees and stones for making shelters and tools. Yet, the plains still held promise. In the spring, both of the rivers flooded, bringing precious water and fertile soil to the land. Perhaps farms could be successful there. Driven by the need to grow food, people moved out of the foothills and onto the plains. This region began known as Sumer, and its people, the Sumerians. Section 3. An uncontrolled water supply in the river valley. The farmers who moved to Sumer faced many challenges. One of the biggest problems was the uncontrolled water supply. During the spring, rain and melted snow from the mountains flowed into the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, causing them to flood across the plains. Unfortunately, no one could be sure exactly when the floods would come. If it happened after farmers planted their crops, the young seedlings would be washed away. For much of the rest of the year, Sumer's sun-baked soil was dry and hard as stone. Hot, strong winds blew thick layers of dust across the ground. Faced with such dramatic seasonal changes, farmers were constantly struggling to raise crops with either too little or too much water. In order to grow food, they needed a way to control the water, so they would have a reliable water supply throughout the entire year. Therefore, Sumerian farmers began creating irrigation systems for their fields. They built levees alongside the rivers to prevent flooding. When the land was dry, the farmers poked holes in the levees, allowing the water to flow through the holes and into the thirsty fields. Over time, the Sumerians learned other ways to control the supply of water. They dug canals to shape the paths the water flowed. They also constructed dams along the river to block the water and force it to collect in pools they had built so that they could store the water for later use. Section 4. Building and maintaining a complex irrigation system. Irrigation systems provided enough water for Sumerian farmers to grow plenty of food, but a new problem arose: how to maintain the irrigation system across village boundaries. The irrigation system passed through a number of villages as it carried water from the river to the fields. The system needed constant care and repair. Canals became clogged with silt, so farmers had to clean them regularly. One clogged canal could disrupt the entire system. Because villages were connected for miles around by these canals, farmers could no longer live apart or in small groups. They had to work together for the common good. Gradually, villages came to depend on one another to build and maintain this complex irrigation system. People who lived in different villages may have worked together to clear the silt from the canals to keep them open. Workers may have scooped water from one reservoir to another to ensure that the water levels were balanced. As the Sumerians worked together, they began to create larger communities. Between 3500 and 3000 BCE, villages grew into towns. Some towns in Sumer then became cities with populations as large as several thousand people. Section 5. Attacks by neighboring communities. As Sumerian cities grew, they fought over the right to use more water. Sometimes people in cities located upriver, closer to where the river begins, built new canals or blocked other cities' canals. In this way, they kept water from reaching the cities that were downriver, farther from where the river begins. Disputes over water became so intense, they often led to bloodshed. The Sumerians looked for ways to protect their cities from neighboring communities. The plains provided no natural barriers. There were no mountain ranges or rushing rivers to keep out enemies. Around the cities, the Sumerians began constructing strong walls out of mud bricks that were baked in the sun until hard. The Sumerians also dug moats outside city walls to help prevent enemies from entering their cities. Most people lived in houses within the walled cities, but the farms lay outside. In case of attack, farmers fled the fields for safety within the city walls. The walled cities of Sumer were like independent countries. Historians call them city-states. By about 3000 BCE, most Sumerians lived in city-states, enjoying the benefits of a protected and governed independent area. Section 6. From small farming villages to large city-states. As you've seen, beginning around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians progressed from living in small farming villages to building large walled city-states. How and why did this happen? The answer lies not only in the problems of the Sumerians faced, but also in their solutions. A basic challenge for any group of people is how to provide enough food for itself. Food shortages had forced settlers in Mesopotamia to move from the foothills down to the river valley. The farmers there faced the problem of having either too much water or too little. To control the water supply, Sumerians built a complex irrigation system. The system crossed village boundaries, so the Sumerians had to cooperate with one another. This led them to live in larger communities, the first city-states. Their independent city-states often fought with one another to defend themselves. The Sumerians built walls and dug moats around the cities. By 3000 BCE, the solutions to the challenges faced by the Sumerians had transformed Sumerian farming villages into walled city-states. Lesson summary. In this lesson, you've learned how geographic challenges led to the rise of city-states in Mesopotamia. Food shortages in the hills. A shortage of food forced people to move from the foothills of the Zagros Mountains to the plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This plains area became Sumer. Controlling the water supply on the plains. Farmers in Sumer faced times of flooding and drought. They built irrigation systems to create a steady water supply. Maintaining these complex systems required cooperation among villages. From farming villages to city-states. As villages grew into towns and cities, some became large city-states with protective walls around them.